All right. Good morning, everyone. So welcome to day 4 of Energy Week, Thursday morning. Thank you for showing up bright and early. It's been a great week so far. Looking forward to another day of energy nerding out, basically. So I'm Brian Korgel, Director of the Energy Institute. Really looking forward today. So first, I'm going to introduce Zach Carr here, who's going to talk about a case competition going on, which is pretty exciting, focused on the students. So come on up, Zach.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's had a great breakfast. My name's Zach Carr. I'm the Associate Director of Community Engaged Experiences in the Office of Career and Life Design. We're a brand new office in the UT Graduate School. We're really excited to pilot a new program this year in partnership with Energy Week and one of our nonprofit partners called the Green Workforce Collaborative. Today, what we'll be doing, we have a group of students. If you're here for the case competition, could you just raise your hand for me really quickly? We have some really talented graduate students in the room today that are going to be participating in interdisciplinary teams. We're presenting them with a energy-related case challenge for the state of Texas. They'll spend this morning and into the afternoon working in the team setting to come up with solutions for our case challenge. They will present to judges this afternoon that we have from internally here at the University of Texas, but also externally with some really cool organizations in the energy sector. So they will present to our judges this afternoon, and then this evening at the reception, we will announce the winning team as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We're really excited to be involved with Energy Week. I'm going to take everyone, if you're involved in the case competition, if you can meet me in the back in the hallway. We'll go through a couple of logistics there, but we're really excited to kick things off this morning, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day of programming here at Energy Week. So thank you, guys.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Zach. All right, so I'm going to turn it over next to Jack Balagia. So Jack was Vice President and General Counsel of ExxonMobil. He's an adjunct faculty in our law school here at the University of Texas and the Executive Director of the KBH Energy Center. So come on up, Jack.
Good morning. Thank you very much. How many of you play Wordle? How many of you have already done today's Wordle? How many of you wait till right before midnight to do your Wordle? That's what my wife does. I do it first thing in the morning, and I did it in 2 this morning. I just want to let you know. I won't tell you what word I started with. Okay, back to the subject at hand. I am the Executive Director of the K. Bailey Hutchison Energy Center here at the university. There are 30 energy centers of some sort on this campus, and we I think it's very important that we all collaborate, and we are very proud to be collaborating with the Energy Institute here on campus to put on Energy Week. It has been a great week, and it's going to continue to be a great week. KBH is the only energy center on campus that includes the business school, the law school, the geoscience school, and the engineering school, so we're pretty proud of that fact. We touch about 1,000 students every year in some form or fashion. We have an energy studies minor that is a summer program that allows students to do a concentration in energy and put it on their resume and diploma. We have a student advisory council. I would encourage anybody who's interested to participate in our council. We sponsor case competitions. And one of the best things we do is we do student treks. We take students to Midland, to Houston, to Dallas, to Fort Worth, to see people in the energy business and to see energy operations as they are occurring. We've taken them to refineries, to gas plants, to drilling sites. So it's a great opportunity to learn more about the energy business. We have an annual fall symposium. This year it is on September the 12th. Here in Austin, we get about 500 people to come in, and our honoree this year, our keynote speaker, is the CEO of ExxonMobil. So we're pretty excited about that. With that, I'm going to introduce our next panel. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Pettigove to introduce the next panel. Stephen is Assistant Dean at the OBJ School. Stephen, the stage is yours.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Excited to talk to you about economic development and the energy transition. Thanks to the Energy Institute for having us. As for those who have mentioned, I'm at the LBJ school, and it's always great to have cross collaborations across campus. So thank you for having us and the opportunity to do this panel. Today, what we're going to do is do something that I'm really excited about and that really excites me, and that is the world of economic development. That's mostly where my work kind of I spend most of my time thinking about. And particularly, a lot of the work that I'm now doing is helping communities and regions start to think about strategies that relates to the energy transition. And we've got a really great panelist, a group of panelists here. They're going to talk about that and the work that they do in that space. So today we're really going to think about the energy transition, but think about it as it relates to how it impacts our workforce, how does it impact our communities, particularly from a job creation and a standpoint, as well as what's the policy necessary to do that. We have 3 really great panelists with us today. I should say I don't have your bios, and that's because, frankly, I thought you were going to be introduced. We were all going to be introduced. So so we're running a little ragged today. So bear with us. But so let's do this though. What I'll ask the panelists to do is talk a little bit of just briefly about your background and what you do and what you bring to this topic. I will say when we put this panel together, we've got really 3 diverse perspectives in the world of economic development and kind of doing this work in an interesting place. So the first person to my right is John Roberts. John is a dear friend. John is a managing director partner at Tip Strategy. I'll let him tell you a little bit about this. But one of the things I love about John is every semester I have John come to my economic development class, and we spend about 3 hours with my students debating these issues. And it's been fun to do this over the course of several semesters because I think our perspective on this work has changed pretty dramatically as it has accelerated. So John, tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got to this point, and a little bit about TIPS.
Certainly, and my mic is working.
Yep, we can
my
hear
voice
you.
Isn't great. Thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be part of the things that Stephen is doing at the university, and really kudos to him. I think you're very fortunate to have him. My background is varied. I came out of the venture capital industry in Portland, Oregon, and was fortunate enough to have a sabbatical, I think when I was 40, and was prepared to do nothing for quite a while, and was picked out by Governor Gardner to run economic development for the state of Washington. And that eventually brought me to Texas in a similar job, and then I joined a consultancy, which is TIP Strategies. That firm does economic development strategic planning for communities. We also do it on behalf of, on certain occasions, on behalf of private clients. And we have a site selection background. So our perspective relates to energy, and I could go on at length, so stop me any moment. But it's really about what industry is needing in relationship to what the public sector is providing. And let me just stop there, because that'll be, if that makes sense, that's the world in which we live.
Yep, that's great. That's really, really great. Our next panelist is Sophia Cunningham. Sophia is from the Houston Energy Transition Initiative. This is the first time I've met Sophia, but I know her boss really well, Jane, very well. I met Jane a few years back. I was asked to write something for Texas Monthly looking at the future of Texas in the next 50 years, and the question about energy transition as it relates to economic development was front and center. And the great work that y'all are doing at the Houston Energy Transition Initiative is a best practice, frankly, as communities are thinking about this. So talk to us a little bit about your background, how you arrived there, and a little bit about the initiative.
Thanks, Stephen. Well, thanks for having me and for having Hetty come and speak today. It's great to see you all here. Just a little background on kind of the Greater Houston Partnership overall. We are the chief economic development organization for the Greater Houston region. And what that has meant over time really is that companies, when they're thinking about growth or expansion or headquarter relocation opportunities, they'll typically go to a state, and then that state will send out the information of here's the company, here's what they need, and then those regional groups will send it out to the locals. And so we're that group for Houston. We represent 12 counties. That's not quite stretching to Beaumont or Corpus Christi, but a good cross-section of the Gulf Coast. And so a few years ago, we got really serious about our energy future and founded the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, which I'll discuss a little further. But it's all about how do we kind of build on the best of traditional energy skills as we think about our energy future, both from producing more energy with also less emissions.
I remember the great quote that Jane had with me when I did that interview for Texas Monthly was, "You don't solve the energy transition without Houston." And it's got a really kind of an interesting point about how you all are thinking about that and leveraging the next opportunity as it relates to economic development. Our final panelist is Kathleen Baireuther. Did I get the last name right? I nailed it. Yes, for that stick. Kathleen is with CERT Systems. Kathleen, talk a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I actually started my career with John's firm in economic development for about 5 years, and then transitioned more and more toward the private sector. So I've worked in everything from think tanks to early stage startups to Ford Motor Company. So definitely have solved the technology commercialization and community partnership challenge from many different directions, and I'm going to try to bring that perspective to our conversation today.
Awesome. Well, this is our panelists. It's a great, I think you can see we've assembled a really great group. For the first question, I've actually asked all three panelists to reflect on the same question, and that is this, as an opening to our discussion, and maybe reflect through your organization's background, the work that you're doing, because I think each of you bring a diverse perspective on this. So as we're entering the critical decade of climate and energy transition, we're sort of there. We're not really entering, we're there. What do you guys see as the most important opportunity for regional economic development leaders, business leaders to act on right now as they're sort of thinking about how to activate on this moment and capitalize on the moment, particularly maybe here in Texas, but also broadly speaking? And maybe, John, we'll start with you.
Well, I thought about that question, and it's a fascinating one because we've been very tech-oriented, partly because of my background and partly because of the current economic realities. And to say that is to appreciate what the energy demands of tech companies are. And those demands are extraordinary. And I think we in economic development, I always joke that we're the last ones to be talking about what everyone else has been talking about, and then we act as if we had discovered it. And
that's so true.
And in this case, it really is about the extraordinary demands that data centers are putting on the energy grid. And I don't think anyone fully anticipated the extent of that demand. And it's driven by two things that, again, you all know, and I'm going to say it as if we had just discovered it. The first is the administration's emphasis on cryptocurrency. That has always been out there. The question of cryptocurrency has been out there for going on 20 years now. But this administration's commitment to it means that we are, for better or worse, stuck with it. And to the extent that it may actually drive monetary policy globally. And now that that's happened, I don't think we can come back from it. Now, what that means for energy is that it's the mining of cryptocurrency is a data center-driven process. And the energy required for those large data centers, and I actually brought an article that you probably read in the Wall Street Journal just yesterday, actually, which is of a coal plant that was being dismantled outside of Pittsburgh and to put in a major new data center. You saw that for cryptocurrency. And it's producing enough power to basically power all of Manhattan if that were the goal. And its purpose is being replicated all over the country. And then the other thing, of course, equally in demand is around AI. And everyone's projection now on the speed at which we will have quantum computing has been accelerated because of Microsoft. And so we're looking at something less than 5 years. We were thinking maybe 10, maybe even less than 5. And again, the demands around that from a data standpoint are extraordinary. So the demand side of the equation and what it means for everything in economic development, the companies, where they locate, the land on which it occurs, and the way that energy is provided, that's our number one challenge and opportunity, to be a little trite about that.
Sophia?
So I'll kind of build on your comments on data centers and power demand growth overall, and then I'll just talk a little bit about how our mindset has shifted in terms of economic development. So first on the power point, I completely agree. The demands are large. There's a bill working its way through the legislature now to kind of talk about how ERCOT plans and forecasts for this. In general, whenever a data center is going to be built, they play the field, they look at a bunch of different states where they could site their location, and then they end up picking one. But if they put into the ERCOT market that, hey, we're going to need this much load, they have to build that into their models right now. And so you have this huge number that is anticipated growth. And so that's one challenge that they're working through in the legislature right now. But what that means for us in Houston is that we've been looking at various reviews from site selectors and surveys that are done on an annual basis, and consistently for at least the last 10 or more years, the number one issue has always been workforce. Where can we get the skilled labor and talent that we need to meet our growth? And so, but over the last year, one of the top issues that's been raised is actually access to affordable, reliable power. And so seeing that kind of eclipse workforce to a degree is a huge shift. So one thing that we're doing at HEDI is we're starting to pull together the narrative to arm our economic development folks as they think about what's the relative competitiveness of Houston and the ERCOT market overall when you think about large industrial loads being sited here. Berkeley National Lab has done some really good work. They do kind of an annual review of where interconnection queues, timelines, and Texas, or the ERCOT market in Texas, is about 2 years faster than a lot of those other markets. And so it really is competitive, and we've just got to be good at telling that story. The second piece on economic development that we're really working to do is, I think in the past we've kind of been reactive. We've been waiting for these requests for information to come to us, and now we're starting to look through and see what are the key companies that really ought to be here but aren't here. And so, and then kind of proactively reaching out to them and saying, hey, this is a great place for you, and let me tell you why. And to that point, today we see about half of our pipeline in economic development being geared towards energy or energy transition, which is just a tremendous share of the work for us. So we think it's going to yield positive results, and I'll leave it there for now.
You both illustrated something that's really, really interesting to me, like just as your opening comments. The transition, and I think this has to be said out loud because I think it's a super important moment for economic development, is the transition about how important energy and energy reliability has, and the way it has worked its way up the site selection criteria. Like, that's a big deal in our field. Like, that is a huge deal as we think about economic development. Like, for instance, as John and I have been doing this work for 25 years, helping companies and organizations regions make strategies. Energy was always there, but it wasn't top of mind. But now it's top of mind. So I mean, it's a kind of a critical moment, I think, defining about where we are in this space for sure. And then you both mentioned data centers. I can't tell you how controversial data center discussion are right now in economic development. It is the kryptonite that makes everyone go crazy. We could talk more about that when we go through that. But those are 2 points that I think really resonate with me. Kathleen.
Sure. Well, just piggybacking on these, I think infrastructure, broadly speaking, tends to be a huge driving factor in any site selection. So in Texas, of course, we worked at the state level to build the CREZ line. That was transformative and helped with decarbonization. In Houston, they have the hydrogen pipeline, which shaped a lot of the startups that I worked with interest in locating in Houston. All of them are trying to decarbonize heavy industry, and hydrogen's a huge piece of that puzzle in addition to a decarbonized grid. At the local and state level, I also think regulatory certainty, or at least the sense of regulatory certainty, has also played a huge factor in the companies I've worked with. So on the mobility side, at the city level, there was always a friendliness, working with new mobility. the ability to have conversations about what safety means. So that could mean protected bike lanes for autonomous vehicles to operate more safely around bikes. It can also mean lower speed limits. In fact, AVs don't go over 35 miles an hour even now. And then at the state level, this is controversial, but the state preemption, basically the state sets the regulations for things like autonomous vehicles, and the cities can't interfere with that. So when I was working at Ford to cite that autonomous vehicle program and launch it in Austin, I could go to corporate and say, we can bet on the city and we can bet on the state, and we know our $200 million investment is safe here. And I think that makes a big difference, and we also know it will stay safe.
Interesting. So you see favorability in the idea of preemption a bit in terms of, you may be the only person that's ever said that.
I'm not saying favorability. I'm saying if you have to go make a case for a corporate to relocate, reliability and like knowing what's coming.
For sure, absolutely.
Yes.
So let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about ecosystems and how communities kind of build around that, both from investment, infrastructure, innovation stage. John, I'm curious to know a little bit more about the impact of current federal energy policy. You were hinting at that in your introduction, and particularly the implications for what it means about how companies are thinking about corporate decision making, location making, particularly here in Texas. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, let me not talk in the abstract, and let me talk specifics. And we actually brought Kathleen on to work on this project in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And they had received a federal grant for basically a niche opportunity, but an interesting one, and that's the electrification of outdoor recreation equipment and engagement with the outdoors. And the things that instantly pop in your mind are the ones, in fact, that they are looking at, everything from electric motors for snowmobiles to electrification of trails and so forth. And in a recent meeting, they brought that question up about whether we'd be follow-up funds, because normally the way the Economic Development Administration works is they give grants to the communities and then they follow up those grants with actual project investment. And they asked, well, where will this lead? And of course, I think you all could have answered that question just as well as I can, which is it will lead nowhere. It will lead nowhere from a federal investment standpoint, at least for the next, not just the next election cycle in 2 years, but for the next 4 years. I think it would be unrealistic to expect, and I'd be interested to hear anyone else's point, that there will be any more federal dollars around electrification, period, just period. Now, so what we've in fact told our client as a result is that this, to the extent that you want to act on this, that you want to be a base for expansion of companies into the area and entrepreneurial initiatives, it will have to be entirely driven by the private sector's response to consumer demand. So let me just stop there because I could go on again.
Kathleen, do you want to jump in on this question?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work I do with startups is around value proposition and customer discovery. And so those of you that have worked at all in customer discovery and technology commercialization, if nobody wants to buy your thing, it doesn't matter how good it is. And so I think if nobody wants to buy electrification because there isn't a value proposition, that might come to bear. But this question of like, does somebody with a trailer, to use this example, that actually regenerates energy or helps reduce drag on your pickup that's dragging that trailer, like, wow, you're gonna save a lot on gas, you're gonna have this ability to charge at night and potentially power things inside of the trailer. Like, people are excited about the value proposition of these technologies, and I think focusing on that, especially in the years to come, will become more and more important.
What about what's going on in Houston? Talk a little bit more about the work in Houston and how you are thinking about this space.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we kind of tend to think of it in terms of headwinds and tailwinds. And so what are some of the headwinds? You know, tariffs create a lot of uncertainty and add costs, especially when you think about in the energy industry, tariffs on steel. That's a major input into a lot of the pipes, tubes, all the things that make the energy industry work. And so I think that's one headwind, you know, when you're talking about pausing or clawing back loan programs, grant programs, carving out funding from specific projects. That also creates uncertainty as you think about developers that have maybe made announcements, but haven't gone all the way to that threshold of a final investment decision with their boards. And so that's another challenge. But at the same time, there's also tailwinds. You know, we were talking about the data center and AI demand growth. That creates opportunities for us to show our relative competitiveness here in Texas. You know, we also think about how does this impact trade overall, and we've already received some kind of inbound inquiries from Mexico saying, well, we are anticipating these tariffs. Maybe it makes sense for us to actually look at developing a site in Houston as a way to kind of circumvent these. And so that's you know, a good benefit and upside for us in Houston. So I'd say that overall, we're kind of in this period of uncertainty, but also rationalization where in the past few years, a lot of startups, it's always been hard to raise capital, but there's been a relatively good flow of capital into the startup world, and now we're starting to see this review of, okay, well, this technology may sound interesting, but it doesn't really make sense for, you know, the next several years. And so we're gonna pull back from that area. So I think part of that's driven by federal policy and state policy, but a lot of that is just kind of the timing of the market of what we're in right now and isn't necessarily related. So I think those are some of the challenges that are set before us. But for Houston, I think that because we've approached this not as an energy transition where we're, you know, shutting off one energy resource in favor of another, where we're really truly all of the above, all energy resources have a critical role to play, I think that we're relatively advantaged in that area and well positioned to continue to approach this from an economic development and competitiveness point of view.
So John, as you all and TIPS have done work across the country, obviously Houston's a leader in the space. Can you pinpoint a couple other communities that have really embraced the moment as it relates to the energy transition and really led with that as an economic development efforts? I know you've done work in Miami and Colorado Springs and other places that have really embraced this moment. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think no one has been more aggressive than the state of Colorado.
Yeah.
And it's a very explicit policy. But let me, again, state the obvious. The demand is so extraordinary that it's overriding policy. And that's something that I think we all have to absorb, and we all have to absorb it in our own ways. By that I mean seeing how that plays out in the incentive game. And right now, incentives continue to be a lure for data centers. Incentives meaning writing down taxes, workforce training, a variety of things. You could ask yourself legitimately, why is anyone incentivizing something that's going to happen anyway? Well, you've given the answer already, because we want it more than somebody else does. But I spent a lot of time in Oregon, as Stephen knows, and the proliferation of data centers and the energy needed to provide them because of Bonneville Power means that they'll continue to expand there despite the state of Oregon's. And what no one has said yet, and of course needs to be said, is what is the environmental impact of all of this? What's the effect on climate change? And that is a long-term, it's a very real consideration, but it is not in anyone's short to mid-term calculus. It just isn't. What's in their calculus right now is that I can get you down to 5 cents a kilowatt hour because of EPA. End of story. And if I can get it down to 5 cents, now I can't get it down to 5 cents in Houston, and I can't get it into Colorado. So that's where the incentives comes in again. But if I'm going to write down the cost of a data center's energy to 5 cents a kilowatt hour, it's going to be on someone else's back. And that's almost always the consumer. So, and again, I'm not speaking out of school here. That is the way it plays out. And so look at your own energy bill, and you can literally track it in relationship to energy demands from other sectors.
So Kathleen, you nodded when John mentioned Colorado and Colorado being aggressive in the space. What lessons learned from Colorado can we take from there and maybe apply here in Texas, for instance?
Yeah, in my experience, working in Colorado and trying to deploy technology there, and then also working on the commercialization side with the national lab there. I think there's a lot of alignment among the different players at every level that really benefits everyone. So you don't have the state versus city dynamic to the same degree that we experience in Texas. And I would say specifically in Denver, they really think and act regionally. So in transportation, you see that, but you also see that just in how all the different e-bike programs, those incentives, once it was proven to be successful, other communities started adopting that.
So let's transition to workforce. It's kind of the second kind of maybe first or second kind of most important site selection criteria in the space. Knowing that Houston is doing a lot in this space and thinking about workforce, talk a little bit about the workforce initiatives that you all have aligned with your with the initiative there at the partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Greater Houston Partnership has been serious about workforce for a long time. 10 years ago, actually, we founded a group called Upskill Houston, which is a special initiative within the partnership that's geared towards addressing the skills gap between those with a high school degree and then those with a 4-year degree. And so that kind of skilled craft labor is critically important to so much of what we do in Houston. And so that organization has really served as that collective table that brings together businesses, NGOs, community-based organizations, and then training providers and academic institutions to talk about how do we fill those skills gaps and make sure that we're aligning talent to the careers that are actually in demand and high growth, high wage careers. What we've found, there's a good report that came out of Good Reason Houston. This isn't the best advertising for economic development people, but about 20% of graduates from Houston Independent School District receive a living wage 6 years after their high school graduation. That's not good. That's something that we need to change. So that kind of points to the importance of this initiative and that it continues to make progress. And another way that we think about this too is just how do you continue to help people be successful in an increasingly tech-enabled economy? So not so much where tech is replacing jobs, but where you think about it in terms of tech is helping people be more productive. Now, how that all relates to energy, when we first started the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, one thing that we found that was a critical data point for us was that over time, the traditional energy industry was requiring fewer people to do, but also producing more energy at the same time. So it just, with the advent of the shale revolution and everything like that, you just required fewer people to work a drill rig. And so things like that kind of pointed us in the direction of, hey, we really need to be thinking about the energy transition as critical for our economic development and job growth in the future.
So as we think about the energy transition, I think one of the things to make note of as it relates to economic development is that there will be winners and losers, right? I mean, economic development is a game where there are always winners and losers. I tell my students that, and that's the ugly thing that we talk about, and unfortunately, there are winners and losers as we think about investment opportunities. So to that end, John, there's a lot of communities across the country, some here in Texas, that have been really focused on traditional energy production, and the workforce is really centered around that. Are there places that we can point to that are, like Houston, thinking about that transition between what are the traditional energy skills that are needed in the arena and those that are thinking about what's the next generation of skills, particularly as the workforce is going to change dramatically in this space?
Well, if I can put that question on hold for a moment and just respond, and Stephen wouldn't be happy if I weren't controversial.
Sure.
And I will be, even at the cost of our own profession to a certain degree. The workforce problem, broadly speaking, which is having an adequate number of skilled people for the jobs that are in demand, is not solvable. It's flat out not solvable. And the factors that could solve it are all in direct opposition to federal policy, every single one of them. All the ways in which you could solve this problem are being actively worked against, the most obvious being immigration. The next one would be to take those companies where the labor is, which we had been doing, and we're simply not going to be doing anymore. And then the other two are, in a way, even more controversial. We could raise the retirement age, keep more people in the workforce. And France tried that. And the mere suggestion that you would even advance the retirement age by as little as 2 years has tremendous pushback. And then, but the fourth, and in its own way, the most controversial, is going to be the solution, and that's technology. And one quick story, my stories are never quick. In a roundtable that we did in Wisconsin, we were doing something like what Houston is doing and trying to get a closer match between the demands of the private sector and the training needs. And we had a number of workforce people in the room, elected officials, and they were bored before the meeting began, and I could see that. And so I said, all right, let's not have that discussion about how the workforce development organizations will meet your needs. Let's begin with the assumptions that your needs will not be met. What do you do? And the whole tenor of the room changed, because that's the discussion that's actually being had in the corporate boardroom. We are not going to be able to find the people that we need to do the jobs that we need. So now we can come back to your question. And it's not who has the best workforce training programs, because they all fail.
That is true. Workforce development is broken across many communities.
They fail.
Yeah.
And they fail for a number of reasons. One is because the basic skills required, that I can write a coherent paragraph and that I can convert a foot to a meter that I can solve for X, is simply not there. It's simply not there. And if it's not there, the community college certification programs and all the things that are being touted can't work. So that's point number one. Point number two is nobody wants to work in manufacturing. It's a long, protracted discussion, and we can get into the why of it, but it's critically important that workforce development organizations face up to that reality. That you can certify them, they can meet the certification, in many cases they do, but they don't stay in the job once they have it. It's very demanding. If I work at Starbucks and you order a soy latte and I give you a hazelnut latte instead, I dump it out, give you another one. No great harm. One error in a fab, and you could shut down the entire plant, and it can be $1 million mistake. So let me rephrase your question and put it this way. Those organizations that begin with that reality instead of hiding from it and trying to solve for it, and I know this is controversial, those are the ones that are going to be on the cutting edge. Sorry, went on too long.
No, so this idea of understanding kind of these external factors, but also knowing that there has to be some intervention. We could argue, like here in Texas, for instance, workforce development, as John knows, is something I've been spending more and more time thinking about, because it's complicated and it feels to be broken and in lots of different places. And it's a fun thing to try to, for me, intellectually try to think about how you can put it together. But HBA here around college, community college and credentials of community college, I think may have a big impact and may set Texas apart, particularly as it relates to some of the technical skills that are going to be required in this space, more so than others, because there's been such an overemphasis on workforce boards and community-based workforce programming that you can't scale those programs at the scale that you need to kind of meet the needs, perhaps. I do want to do one last question for all of you and then open it up for questions. And this question is for you, is for Kathleen. I'm curious to know a little bit about this idea of, as we look at the kind of the federal policy and state policy arena, how are you thinking about this space as you're advising companies in this space? Like what are the things that what are the opportunities that you see, and what are the challenges the warning signs that you see? Today is the day after a tariff world, so we know that's there. But what other things beyond tariffs?
Well, I would say the thing to really focus on would be like the early stage research and development funding, which we're at a university, so there's probably a lot of labs here and a lot of scientists here that will be impacted by that. Historically, DoD has also played a really large role in things like advanced materials and batteries, so the energy I call us all energy nerds, but the technology commercialization folks in my world actually tend to also have money from things like DARPA, which can even be more generous than Department of Energy. So that's not all going away, but there's a ton of anxiety. I was just at the National Renewable Energy Lab's annual conference focused on startups. There's a lot of venture capitalists that go to that, and there's definitely a lot of anxiety because that funding to get a company to the point where venture capital wants to invest in it, that's usually some kind of grant, federal funding, non-dilutive funding that actually gets the company to the proof points that they need to get to. So I would say that's the biggest point of anxiety. And even those being frozen for a little bit, these small companies can't absorb that 6 months of waiting, and they're not going to file a lawsuit. So that's what I'm seeing the most of.
So Sophia, I want to ask you the same question, but I want to do a lens with Texas because we're in the middle of the legislature session, and there's lots of things happening in the legislature. What are things that you all that are looking to say this may create opportunities for us, but what are the things that you all are worried about legislatively?
So from the Greater Houston Partnership's perspective, there's not a whole lot in energy that we're actually working on this session. There's a few things. One, there's a pore space bill. It's very, very technical, but it has to do with who owns the pore space subsurface when you're injecting CO2 into the ground. So that's like one thing that we're supporting. There's a few other things in there in the mix that we're supporting. But the big push for us right now this year is actually to address water infrastructure issues. This has been tangentially related to energy as you think about produced water. But there's a huge push within the legislature this year to really get clear and address our chronic water infrastructure issues, which we've certainly felt in Houston, but we're not alone. I mean, Austin, West Texas, they've all felt this issue. So I think that's one area we're looking to make progress on. I did want to build on your comment, though, just a little bit about technology commercialization. This is a huge part of how we think about the future evolution of the energy market and production. You talked about DARPA. The twin of that is ARPA-E, and they have invested in the 15 years that they've been around in the federal government. They've invested about $85 million into Texas, and into Texas companies, that is. And that has resulted in about $1.9 billion of economic value and over 850 jobs. That's, may seem small, but when you think about the size of investment, which is quite small in energy, that's just a huge return. And so those types of programs are really, really important as we think about kind of catalyzing that early research and development and then being able to bring along industry and private sector investment as that technology matures.
So John, last question for you, and that is maybe putting both of those together, both state and federal, but also asking a little bit of a twist on that. It's clear possibly that that agencies like the EDA is going to pull back, right? So one of the things that's been really interesting in the economic development space is how much the Economic Development Administration, particularly under the Biden administration, went all in on place-based economic development, very much tied to the energy space. Signals are that that's not going to be happening as it relates to the Trump administration, possibly. What are your thoughts, and what would be your insights for community leaders, regional leaders that are thinking about this transition that would be looking to those dollars to help kind of support some of their efforts going forward?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. And in a way, that's a loaded question, because what we haven't talked about is resiliency. Yeah. And the reason for the energy transition originally, and I remember a project that we did in Sun Valley quite a number of years ago where everyone was talking about peak oil. Literally, it was 20 years ago. And that was the big conversation. When are we going to reach peak oil? And it seems silly conversation now, especially because the transition from a demand standpoint is LNG and nuclear and some of the things that Kathleen is working on. So from the supply side, the anxiety that we had 20 years ago is simply not there anymore. So I think this invites a completely different perspective, but that was only one part of the energy transition discussion. The other part was climate change. So again, let me just put a finer point on that. The original discussion was in part, we won't have enough supply to meet demand. But then, and that And that's gone. That's flat out gone. LNG exports, I was reading Audubon magazine to get the other perspective, and the export of LNG is really controversial, but it's hugely beneficial for Texas in the Gulf port that we're sending that out. But from a climate standpoint, it's controversial in its own right, because certainly powering plants in Malaysia or elsewhere with liquid natural gas is preferable to a coal-fired power plant. But the process of getting the LNG, sending it to other countries is itself. So again, without wanting to be controversial about this, the energy transition from an environmental standpoint is also not solvable. But that doesn't mean that we sit on our hands. And that's where the resiliency question comes in. So all of our recommendations now to all of our clients is that in the larger energy discussion, begin to do the things and make the investments that gave you resiliency against climate effects. And so that's now a baseline in all of our planning. Tell us what you're doing to anticipate, and all you have to do is turn on the news tonight to see the latest weather storms and the flooding that's going to hit Tennessee and others. And this is constant. I live in Oregon. A good part of the year, the fires there means that there are entire weeks when you can't go outside. So that's the reality. And the reality is not going to be solvable in the short to the midterm. It may not be solvable at all. So the resiliency question becomes a baseline in all of our planning. And I think Houston has gone the same direction. And I know Kathleen has been working on that with the Gates folks and others.
Questions from the audience? We've got some time to take a couple questions if you have them.
I'll bring the mic to you.
I had a question on the last thing you said about peak oil, and then with these data centers coming in, and we're going to need just more grid demand, and then also we have a growing global population, and natural gas is going to be used for fertilizer and plastics. I mean, are we about to hit the next peak, and instead of investing in infrastructure that might take 10 years to build, when we hit that peak, we're going to be scrambling in 10 years instead of looking ahead?
Well, I'd like Kathleen to answer that.
I don't have a great answer for you other than there have been some interesting folks pairing things like natural gas to power data centers, but data centers produce a ton of heat, so on the back end you can actually do interesting things with that heat to run a turbine. So I do think folks are thinking about how you chain these different technologies together. And again, if you go back to value proposition, if having a battery next to something solves a real problem that saves you money, people are going to start citing batteries. So I don't think the only benefit of batteries is that you can use the renewables. The batteries solve a real problem for a business. It's a replacement for a diesel generator or a redundancy for a diesel generator. So I think the optionality and the fact that we can run things like a transition versus switching one off and the other on is actually a benefit for most businesses.
Is your question kind of when's peak oil demand?
I was kind of saying, it seems like we're going to hit a peak oil demand.
Maybe peak energy demand or something. I mean, that is a discussion right now. I mean,
Yeah, so there's, all the big energy companies, ExxonMobil, Shell, Total, they all have energy outlooks. The IEA has one, the EIA has one, and they all say something slightly different, right? If you look at BP's, their kind of thoughts on peak fossil demand is relatively, in the near future. Others, not so much. And so I think the answer is they're all forecasts. None of them are going to be right. My personal view is probably that we're not going to see that for quite some time because we still have, billions of people to lift out of energy poverty in this world. And so I really don't see that too soon.
And let me just suggest 2 websites. Bless you for not having PowerPoints.
John wanted a PowerPoint. I said
yes,
no. I saved you guys from PowerPoints.
Yeah, exactly. So lastenergy.com, and that's the website, lastenergy.com. It's really about unlocking nuclear energy at scale. And Texas is in the crosshairs of that. And I think it's really important that you all stay aware of that. And then RMI's own analysis on the RMI website about way that data centers are going to be increasingly powered by a variety of different energy sources. So I think that the peak question really is gone. And that includes, as Kathleen pointed out, which is very important, which is battery storage. And that's another, along with hydrogen, less so nuclear, but certainly alongside wind and solar and LNG. I think demand will increase, supply will keep abreast of it.
We've got time for one more question. I saw right there in the front, sir.
John, thank you for being controversial. I appreciate that. You made a statement, and my brain just hit a brick wall and just shut down when you said something to the effect of the environmental issues within the energy transition cannot be met or satisfied or something. Could you expand on that, please?
Well, it's we did a thought experiment with our data team, which is if we could stop, if there were no more CO2 were being pumped into the atmosphere, what are the experts saying about how long would it take to arrest the climate events that are already? And the answer was, how can I say this without being really depressing? We have set in motion climate change that we cannot arrest any longer. It doesn't mean that we can't make it worse. That's the depressing part. But Kathleen, help me out here, not because I don't know what I want to say, but because what I'm saying is so depressing.
It is depressing, and I think that you're talking about the 13-odd geophysical tipping points on the planet, and how we're, at risk of going beyond those tipping points that are binary events. You are either on or off of a tipping point, and yet, having spent my career in this space, I fully accept that. But then the next question is, how do we address that? So,
right.
Removing the CO2 and the other greenhouse gases becomes sort of the next mandate. And I've been preaching for years that if we electrify all the cars and fix all the industrial thermal processes and electrify all of our homes, okay, great, but we haven't done a single thing to address all of the greenhouse gases.
Correct.
And so what we need, I think, is massive energy sources that can be turned into, direct air capture and CCS and things of this nature.
Right.
I have one optimistic thing that is very Texas related, so I think this group will appreciate it. So the course I took on carbon capture, utilization, and storage really focused on geology, and the places that are going to be strong in this are geology, and understanding geology is a huge part of that. So the companies and the geologies that are good for sucking all of the carbon out are also really well suited for shoving it back in. And I think we actually have the talent and a lot of the landscape to be able to be a part of that in Texas. And we have a mostly decarbonized grid to power some of that. As is mentioned here, it's actually incredibly energy efficient to do that. So there is still a big challenge. But that science and the science to CERT systems actually is an electrolyzer to convert CO2 to carbon neutral ethylene. There is science up and coming to do this. Getting it to price parity, making it affordable is a huge challenge, but that's a business challenge, not necessarily a technological one.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think that there's a very live discussion right now about the relative cost of, again, this is my view, of resiliency and adaptation versus we're going to completely and fundamentally change our energy system as we know it. And so because that proposition, which is the one that's been promulgated up to this point, is on the order of trillions of dollars per year, which a lot of people are not willing to pay. And so until we have that, it's how do you kind of build resilience and adaptation to meet some of those challenges. So I think that's the short version of how I would say some of the live conversations are starting to evolve. And then the other piece, of course, is technology. I mean, there's a whole host of technologies that haven't been contemplated, built, scaled, commercialized yet that could be really helpful in this space. I'll leave it there.
That's really good.
Join me in thanking the panelists. Thank you for having us. Thank you, guys.